Today we'll be discussing moss treatment, moss abatement or removal, as well as gutter cleaning. For moss treatment, we'll typically use a zinc-based powder like this one, which is pretty nasty stuff. So you're going to want proper PPE, which includes a mask, goggles, and gloves. Of course, you'll also want a harness and appropriate safety gear for accessing a roof. It's important to always keep your finger on the top white lid here, because sometimes that can fall off when you're spreading the powder. You want to spread the powder on the roof ridges and in lines down the roof, typically every 10 to 15 feet. Now keep in mind, especially if it's windy, this powder can blow everywhere, so you want to make sure that your can is low to the roof as you spread it. You may want to use more or less concentration depending on the amount of moss that you're treating. On average, you'll use 2 to 3 cans for the average house for a general preventative treatment. For areas with thicker moss, generally over a half an inch thick, this is where you'll need to do moss abatement. For moss abatement, you're going to want a stiff bristled broom like this one, and you're basically just going to brush the roof. Generally sweeping down towards the gutter may be helpful to do some side-to-side sweeping as well. It's very important to make sure you have a good harness angle and your harness is completely taut with no slack when you're on the edge of the roof like this. Also, whenever you do a moss abatement, of course, you'll need to do gutter cleaning, and it's also recommended to do a follow-up moss treatment to make sure you really kill the roots of the moss. Gutter cleaning, you're going to want thick rubber gloves like this. A gutter scoop is sometimes helpful as well. And you'll want an extension pole with a roller head. You'll also want a 5-gallon bucket with a pail hook on it. In general, it's most efficient to clean the gutters from the roof, if possible. You'll of course want to make sure you have appropriate harness angles and no slack in your harness. This works good on lower angled roofs. Whenever you're gutter cleaning, it's important to make sure you know what is below the gutters you're cleaning, especially if they're muddy or mucky. You don't want to be dropping that stuff on the client's deck, cars, driveway, etc. And if you do, make sure you go back and clean it up. In this case, it's just blackberries. When cleaning gutters from a ladder, this is where you might find it useful to have or use an extension pole. This can save in the amount of ladder placements or movements you need to do. There are a lot of factors depending on the consistency of the debris in the gutter and the difficulty of ladder placements, height of ladder, etc. This may or may not be more efficient. In this case, it's probably just easier to move the ladder. Once you've consolidated the debris to one spot, you can then begin to move it into your bucket. You can do this using your hands, or if the gutter scoop fits into the gutter, then that works too. Once you have your 5-gallon bucket filled up with debris, then you can empty it into a large contractor trash bag. Another tip is to always keep a rag on you when you're gutter cleaning, so if you do drip mucky stuff down the face of their white gutters, you can clean it off. This is a big pet peeve for some clients. Recap for moss treatment. First, make sure you have the proper PPE. This includes gloves, mask, and goggles. Always keep your finger on the top of the can so the top doesn't fall off. Be mindful of the wind. Don't do moss treatment if it's really windy, and keep the can low to the ground as you spread it. And use an appropriate amount of moss treatment. On average, you can use 2 to 3 cans for a roof, but if it's a larger house or a heavier amount of moss, you may need more. Moss abatement recap. First, make sure you're using the appropriate tool. A stiff bristled broom works best. Be mindful of your harness angle as well as the slack in your harness. You don't want too much. And make sure you follow up with a moss treatment to kill the roots of the moss, and of course a gutter cleaning because you just filled their gutters with all the moss you broomed off. Gutter cleaning recap. First, make sure you have the proper tools. This includes thick rubber gloves, a 5-gallon bucket with a pail hook, and extension pole. Cleaning from the roof is the most efficient if you can do so safely given harness angles and anchor points. Use an extension pole to reduce the amount of ladder placements. And make sure you're aware of what's underneath you as you clean the gutters. If they're sensitive surfaces, don't make a mess of them.